And the first thing I'll do, I just kept this screen open so that we would understand what this WebEx was all about. And now we're going to check the main, what we call poster, which is like the end-to-end scenario. So we understand what we're going to cover, what we're going to focus on. So let me get this recording icon here out of the way, and let's go. So basically this poster or presentation, I'll share this with you after the WebEx session with the link to the recording. If you don't get it today, you'll have it in your inbox on Monday, because usually we have to download these MP4s, and it takes quite some time. And since it's Friday, maybe you won't get it till Monday, but nonetheless, this poster represents really a overview of the end-to-end process, whether we're talking about UN-owned equipment, contingency-owned equipment, troops, and what the process is in TM in terms of planning the transportation. Then again, adding the freight to this specific, let's say, transportation, right? If let's say we're going to hire a freight forwarder, and now the process would be a bit different. We're going to look at how that is done in SRM in terms of raising a shopping cart only for freight, instead of how it was done before, where we would add the freight to the actual shopping cart with the goods in them. And then finally, we have our execute and monitor here at the end. Let me just make sure, let me go back and click here on the pen so you guys know what I'm doing at all times. Let's get some highlighter here. Okay, so again, this is the overview process for the procurement UN-owned equipment. This would be the case if we were using a load list for contingency-owned equipment or troops. I believe with the highlighter it'll be easier to follow what I'm saying. So we're going to go over these two steps, then understand what happens in TM, which is the planning, whether it's for the goods vendor or freight forwarder. Again, basically, and this is probably what is mostly interesting to you, so we're going to focus a little more time there, is the freight procurement section, which pretty much is exactly what you're doing until now, except the fact that now the freight is added separately from the shopping cart with the goods. But what mainly involves, what's mainly interesting for you in this WebEx session will be this last section here, which is what we're going to be focusing on for the second half of the WebEx, which is where the TM freight order manager assigns carrier and PO to the freight order, and then edits routes, dates, and charges in TM. So basically, that's what we're going to be focusing on, and that's the aim of this WebEx for so far the two attendees that we have now in the WebEx session. But eventually, you have to understand the sections prior to this, especially the one that has to do with planning, and that's what we're going to focus on that too. And finally, the execute and monitor stage, which is really where we're going to learn how the TM planner would submit events in TM, whether it's for the goods vendor or the freight forwarder. Now, I know that usually when the goods vendor is taking care of the shipment, everything is done external to the TM planner. There should be nothing to do in TM, but there are cases, as here you can see in the poster, where the TM planner would have to update events or upload attachments in some of those cases. And the same for the freight forwarder. The freight forwarder could have access to TM and also update the events, and the TM planner, and the freight forwarder and goods vendor would be updating the events in a system called CCP. All right, so basically we're going to get started now. Just something quite important before we go is that it doesn't really matter for the freight procurement team, for you guys exactly, if it's going to be a UNOE scenario, a COE scenario, or a troops scenario. The process is going to be exactly the same. So we could focus on any of these two. Now, the only difference is, so you understand, is here where we're talking about what the Umoja system does and the documents that it generates. So for the COE and troop scenarios, TM would be generating something that we call the forwarding order, the FWO here, but eventually would result in a freight unit and then a freight order that we will see later on. And if, let's say, we're talking about UN-owned equipment, The forwarding order document is actually called a DTR, which is kind of like a copy of the inbound delivery document in TM. And that DTR, again, generates a freight unit. So basically, those are the main differences. And I want you to understand them just because when we go into TM and we start viewing the documents, you understand the difference between what we're looking at. If we're looking at a forwarding order, that means that we would be looking at a contingency on the equipment scenario or a troop scenario, while if it's UNOE, we'd be looking at a DTR. And we'll go over those now in the system. It's much easier to understand. These documents generate automatically. So let's say once the shopping cart, as you see here in the process, is created, approved, the PO, the same thing is approved as well. And then in SRM, the inbound delivery document number is generated. In TM, automatically, the DTR and freight units are generated. So there's nothing that anyone has to do in that case. They generate automatically. And in the sense for the COE and troop scenario, the same thing occurs, but the previous process is a bit different. So we're uploading an Excel in this case, and then the Umoja system generates the forwarding order and the freight unit. So basically different processes, but end up in generating similar documents in TM, just with different names, forwarding order and DTR. So basically, so you understand that when we go into TM. Now let's say we log into TM as a TM planners. Now still we're talking about TM planners, so we're not focusing on the job you would do as of yet, but it's good to understand what is going on. So basically, if let's say we're talking about any of these scenarios or Incoterms, right? So DAP, FCA, or LOA, which LOA would be the equivalent to the DAP scenario. Everything occurs automatically. So let's say the Umoja system takes care of everything in TM. Okay, and again, this is for the goods vendor or troops contributing country scenarios here with these Incoterms or this scenario LOA. So the Umoja system creates the freight orders automatically, assigns the carrier automatically, and then the TM planner would simply have to manage FOs if necessary. Okay, but the process would occur by itself and automatically. Now we'll see the difference of that when we go into TM now. The difference between the goods vendor stage here and the freight forwarder stage. So now if we're looking at the freight forwarder stage, and again particularly these Incoterms, which is XWorks, FCA, or the scenario for non-LOA, which is the equivalent to the XWorks Incoterm, there's more of manual labor done behind the scenes. So the TM planner would have to log into TM, then select these freight units that, again, as a reminder, were generated at the beginning here in the first two stages, whether we're looking at COE troops or UNOE. So we'd have to select these freight units, and then the Umoja system would generate the proposals, and what the TM planner would do is select the best proposal. So basically, to sum it up, for the goods vendor scenario, it all occurs automatically. Only when needed, we'd have to edit or access the freight orders to make any changes. And for the freight forwarder stage, the TM planner would more manually get involved in the system and start looking for the freight units. Freight unit basically stands for everything that can be transported at once. Okay, so a freight unit would represent that, anything that can be transported at once. So what you're doing in TM is combining everything that can be transported at once based on origin and destination and also dates. So let's say anything that falls into or within the 6 days could be transported at once. Beyond that, it would have to be transported separately. And what the TM planner would do is basically what you would do if you're buying a plane ticket to travel to Hawaii. Let's say you would look for the best proposal. And we're going to see what that looks like in the system in a bit in terms of price, distance, how many stops there are in between. And why this is done, this is even though, and we know because we've performed some trainings in New York with MoveCon, and that's those are the ones who would be more involved in this case, is why are we doing that if eventually the freight forwarder and goods vendor would come up with the last and best result afterwards anyway. Mainly this whole purpose is to track cost. So we would eventually compare the estimated cost that we have in the system based on the proposal that we chose, and compare it to what the actual cost is once the freight forwarder comes back to us. And basically by doing that, in the long run, someone would be in charge of comparing the estimated charges and the actual charges and realize how much it's costing us to do this transportation and where money can be saved. Eventually, that's the final goal. So I think it's quite simple, and of course I did explain it in the simplest way so you would understand all the process before we get to the actual freight procurement stage. I'm not aware of how much you know already about TM. I know you have colleagues that have been trained and may have guided you through it, or maybe not. So if I'm going too fast or you think I'm too generic, let me know and I'll go back and explain some other things. Okay, so I'm just going to continue until somebody clicks on the thanks, Maxime. It's good to know someone's there. All right. And eventually we'll get into the gist of things in a bit. Okay, so just to finish up with this section. So let's say the TM planner has selected the best proposal. So meaning I've selected my cheapest flight to Hawaii in this sense, right? So I'm selecting the best means of transportation, the cheapest, the less distance, the less stops. Umoja actually calculates the estimated charges, and now where are these charges coming from? We're not guessing them. They're based on master data. And this master data can also be updated in the long run based on the comparison between the actual cost and the estimated cost. Then again, once we do that, Umoja system again will create the freight orders. You see those same freight orders that we saw here that were created automatically, and I'm trying to point here with an arrow. So in the vendor stage, goods vendor stage, they were created automatically. Here, Umoja does that based on what you've selected as the best proposal. And once that's done and the freight orders are generated, the SOW is also generated in the system. So you'll see the TM planner will be able to go into the freight order, select the SOW per freight order. And now to understand what a freight order is, it would be, to explain it very simply, let's say also we're booking a flight to Hawaii, but we have a stopover in LA. So LA would be, the distance from New York to LA would be one of the FOs, which is equivalent to a leg. Okay, so basically an FO is a leg, a distance traveled, right, from point A to point B. But our final destination is C. So eventually, if our final destination is C and we're traveling from A to B to C, we would have 2 freight orders. Okay, so that's a very simple way to understand what a freight order stands for. It tells you what leg we are estimating charges for, and that is calculated in the transportation proposal and also selected in the transportation proposal. All right, so the SOW would reflect all the information that is in the freight unit, meaning everything that it was in either the shopping cart, right, all the goods. In this case, we're only talking about vehicles. Phase 2 will add different materials. And if we're talking about a contingency on the equipment or troops, well, again, troops will be people being transported and also some of the luggage that they may be transporting, and the contingency on the equipment will speaks for itself. Okay, so basically that's just the overview. And now maybe we can take a good look into TM so you know what I'm talking about and all this makes a little more sense. Okay, so let me just get out of the screen. Okay, and we're going to go into TM. Okay, so in this case now I'm going into the training environment. So in production, you wouldn't be selecting the icon that I'm going to be selecting now, which is this one here. But for the training purposes, this is the one we're going to be using. So I'm going to run what we call SAP-GUI, which is our training environment, Q5T. And let's navigate through TM a bit so we can now visualize what I've been talking about and understand what a freight unit or freight order is, DTRs, and how it's all linked with ECC. So let's say there's a direct connection, there's a connection, let me say not direct connection, between ECC and TM. So if we have an inbound delivery document in ECC, that's directly reflected in TM by something called DTR. Okay, and that's what we were seeing before in the PowerPoint. But with SRM, it's not the case yet. So there's no direct linkage. So let's say and this is specifically important for you when we're talking about creating the shopping cart for freight, because you could wonder, okay, so if the shopping cart for freight is created and we get the final results and the final prices, why do I have to, as a freight order manager, go into TM and update these rates? Why doesn't it just take it from SRM? Well, for now it doesn't do that, and there's no connection between the two. That's why it has to be done manually. And now let's see, I think the training environment is finally loaded. Here it is. Okay, and let me just, this is quite small, so I'll try to make it bigger if it's too small once we get into TM, but I think it'll be large enough for us. One more screen. Now again, all these steps I'm doing is because this is the training environment. This should just be one click in production. And again, I have another screen here. Again, only because this is the training environment. And here we go. Let me see if I can make this, there you go, much bigger and better, so we can read everything clearly. Okay, so let's say we logged into TM. This is what the screen looks like. And now, before we get into your job specifically, let's just go quickly over the documents that I was referring to. So now we can see them in TM and what TM actually looks like. And then we'll dive into what's important for you. Okay, so we have three main tabs here: ERP, Freight Order Management, and Planning. So basically, let me click on the ERP Logistics. And what we have here is Overview Transportation Requirements. So let's say that now a shopping cart was created and processed, and the system in TM has already generated that DTR document, which is like a mirror document of the inbound delivery document that that ECC generated. We would simply go here, Overview Transportation Requirements. Let's imagine we're going to stick to one scenario instead of always talking about three. We're sticking to the UNOE scenario, so UN-owned equipment. And basically, it's here where we would add, this looks a lot like SRM, and it actually works almost the same way. We would add our either range of DTRs or a DTR number here. You see how the field is called DTR, and this is what the DTR number would look like. And scroll down to the bottom, again, very similar to what SRM looks like. Click on Apply as if we were looking for a shopping cart, and we would get the results of our DTR range here. Now I can make this a bit smaller just so that you can see what the full screen looks like. And I'll scroll down here so we can move just like an SRM to the right. So we have a lot more information to our right, and information that may be very important for us later on. And you'll see when we're actually assigning the freight PO to some of these freight orders. So right now we're not looking at the freight order itself. Remember, the freight order is the last part of the process. It's the legs that we've already assigned while we were doing the transportation planning or transportation management. Right now what we're only looking at here, what's called document, is that DTR document. That was generated when the inbound, see the original delivery, the inbound delivery number here was generated. So these are generated automatically. If I make this column a bit bigger here, and let's see, I think TM has taken control of my presentation. Just hold on one second. All right, got control back. All right, so here we have our type of DTR document, so ZD01. So these types of let's say these acronyms here with the numbers and codes, they simply reflect what type of DTR this is. So what that means is it basically relates to the type of Incoterm that was part of this shopping cart initially. So depending on the type that we have here, that'll tell you already if these documents are vendor scenarios or freight forwarder scenarios or both, right? Like an FCA Incoterm. So basically, so you understand, we have these documents here, and by simply clicking on this DTR number, everything in TM is hyperlinked. So whatever number or document you see on screen will eventually load a new page, which is this one here. So I'm just going to minimize this a bit so you don't lose track of what I'm doing. So you see the page behind this one is still the one I was looking at before. I just clicked on this number. This new window pops up. And we have now our display DTR for UNOE number here with the inbound delivery here. So always at the top section, you'll see what you're looking at, so you're not lost. So right now we're looking at the DTR document. And it tells you what inbound delivery number is connected to it. Let's maximize it now that we know where we are. Usually when we open a new document in TM, it'll take us directly to this document flow tab, which is quite important and probably one of the most important tabs in TM because it shows you exactly that, the flow of documents, meaning all documents that are linked to one other document or several other documents. So if we look at it here, we see that the DTR is linked to this inbound, which in itself is linked to another number here. And what is this number here? If we look to our left, this is what the system calls the planned freight unit. So we talked about the freight unit number before in our poster, and I can always just go back to the poster quickly here and maximize it and see, remember, so let's say we're looking at this section at the bottom here, the DTR and the freight unit for a scenario that is UNOE. Okay, so we can minimize that again, and let me go back to that window that just disappeared. Okay. And here we have our 3 documents. Now, the more acquainted you become with TM, the more you'll know just by looking at this how far the documents or the process is. So right now, what I can see here is that if I only have a DTR and inbound and a freight unit, which are generated automatically, that means that probably I'm looking at a scenario that is probably a freight forwarder scenario where the TM planner is going to have to do everything manually. Because if not, I should already have below this freight unit another document, which is the freight order, because it generates automatically when it's assigned, let's say, a DAP Incoterm. Or if it was an FCA Incoterm, the same thing would happen for the vendor part of the transportation. The system should already have generated a freight order automatically here. But in this case, it hasn't. Okay, and just so that you can see, I'm going to actually make this small again, take it out. We were looking at the one 289. Now let me click on another one. I'm clicking on a second DTR document so you can see the difference between one and the other. And I'm going to drag this back to the screen here. And now we're looking at the DTR 288. The one before was 289. And again, we're back in the document flow tab, and we have our list of documents. But you see the difference here is that now below the freight unit, we have 3 more documents, which are the freight orders. And these freight orders are here already. Now, they could have been generated by the TM planner, if this was a freight forwarder scenario, or the vendor. How do we know that? All we have to do is look to the left here. UNOE vendor delivered freight order, and again, vendor delivered. So we know these are vendor delivered freight orders, so they were generated automatically. So all these documents that show up on this screen were automatically generated by the system. Okay, I'm just checking the chat really quick to see if I'm not missing anything. I think somebody else joined us. Welcome, Ramona. So we're recording the session, just so you know, and eventually we'll be sharing the link later on. I'm not sure when you joined, but welcome. Hopefully it wasn't too recently, so you know how we got to this point. And basically, again, we're just simply covering the document flow tab for a DTR document and understanding what all these documents are and how they're generated. So now we have a better idea, I guess, of what, here I'm going back to my PowerPoint, the documents we were looking at were, right? So let's say we're talking about the DTR. Now we know what it looks like in TM, the freight unit. And again, the FOs, or the freight orders. Okay, so we saw the 2 stages: goods vendor, automatically; freight forwarder, TM planner does it. So let me minimize this again, and here we go. See, automatic DTR, automatic inbound, automatic freight unit, and freight orders. So each one of these freight orders, as we look at here, if I scroll to the right, I said before they should represent a leg, right? Like a sort of a stopover. Okay, so in this case, we don't see that information, but I'll show you how to look for it. But we do see the business partner, meaning who the vendor is for these freight orders. It's Nissan. We also see when it was changed, who changed it, the date that it was created on, and so on. So this tab doesn't give us maybe the information we're looking at, but it gives us enough information to know even the Incoterm and the types of the amount of legs that we would have in this transportation proposal. Okay, so you know that every time I click on one of these hyperlinks, TM is going to generate a brand new window that's going to take me to that specific document. If I click on the inbound, it won't, because it's going to take me to ECC and I'll have to log into ECC, and that's going to take up too much time. If I click on the freight unit, as I do now, it's also loading this new screen, which I'm dragging over now. And we'll see now we have a freight unit here. We have the DTR up top. And let me minimize this. And now I'm going to create a sort of chaotic 3-4 windows so you understand that every time you click on one of these hyperlinks, a new window loads, so you could get lost at one point to understand where you are in TM. But I'm going to teach you how to understand that very quickly. So I just minimized all the windows. So remember, at the top here, we have what we're displaying. So we're looking at the UNOE DTR number and all the documents that are linked to it. So now let me go and search for another one of our documents here. So I have another one. And what is this one? This is the vendor delivered freight unit. So now we're looking at the freight unit 759. If I'm in the tab document flow for this freight unit, and now I don't see it here. See, one of the first things is that I don't see the tab document flow here. So to the right, we have our folder that allows us to see other tabs. And this is important whether you're just performing the freight procurement or not. It's interesting to understand how to navigate all these documents. This folder will show you all the other tabs that you can't see on screen right now. So we can go to the document flow and see the document list here, but now it's led by the freight unit document. The one behind it is led by the DTR number, but you see it's 288, and here the DTR is 288. So you see I'm looking at linked documents, but now the freight unit is leading this this view. Okay, each one of these documents is going to look very similar initially when we're navigating through tabs, but they're really showing you different information and key information. Remember, the freight order is going to show us the SOW document, which is very important. One of the most important things in the freight unit is going to be the tab called stages. And what that's going to show us is the different stages in terms of the shipment or the transportation. Okay, where we're going to stop, if it's a port, if it's air travel, if we're going by truck, what city we're stopping in, what's the handover location. So that's what's important when we're looking at the freight unit. And then the DTR document will share important things like basic information like who the business partner is. Okay, so basically we have the 3 documents open now. And let me see, we have one more. Yes, the third one. See, so right now I have 3 documents open at once. The UNOE DTR, freight unit, and the last one is the vendor. Okay, so those are the 3 documents. And I'm going to go into each one of the tabs that I consider to be very important for you right now before we go into what your duties would be. Okay, if you're assigned the role of the TM freight order manager. Okay, so we're looking at the DTR once again. Important tabs, general data. If we select this general data tab, we'll have exactly that, general data about this, this document, which will tell us the document type. Will tell us also the status of this document, if it's planned, if it's an execution. In this case, the execution has not been started. So what's important here is to understand that if looking at the status of one of these documents, it's telling you if somebody has begun to submit events, and in the case that's important for you, if the actual freight PO has already been assigned to a freight order, and once it's been assigned, it's been okayed and saved, that's when freight forwarders will be able to start submitting events. So a lot of the times this execution status will let you know at what stage the documents are at. Okay, if the freight PO has already been submitted and assigned, then we can start submitting events, or if we can't. Okay, so in this case, we see execution not started, but the planning status is planned. Okay, we'll take a look at that. Let's go below and see that the Incoterm, so this is DAP, so in this case, we should have to do barely nothing. Okay, we don't need any freight for this one. It's an Incoterm DAP, and the final location is unmiss. So basically, this is one of the most important tabs here. The Business Partner tab will define exactly that, right? Who the shipper is, so Nissan, and we have the Business Partner information here. And then the consignee, which would be equivalent to the mission in TM. Okay, TM calls it consignee, but it's South Sudan. And if we scroll over to the right, we will see where the city of, let's say, origin will be. So in this case, Japan, and then the final destination city of South Sudan. Okay. So more information, some data here. Again, maybe not relevant because it's the training environment, but once it's in production, we can find all sorts of key data here in the Business Partner tab. Okay, also locations, dates, and times, and I'll leave it there for this document because I think that mainly covers what we're interested in looking at least basic navigation. Okay, so again, we have the location, date, and times from origin and destination, and we would be done with this DTR document. I could actually even close the window because I can navigate back to it from another doc. And now we look at the freight unit. Okay, let's take a quick look at this freight unit and go again, as I said, to a tab that I consider to be more important, which would be the Stages tab. I can't find it here, so remember we have a folder to our right, and we could always look here for Stages. Okay, and this Stages will represent exactly that, right? So how many stops? In this case, we'd have 1, 2, and 3. So eventually, let's scroll to the right a bit and see that we have our departure date and the source location and the destination location for each stage. So what this tells me is that there should be 3 freight orders, okay, 3 stopovers. So if you're taking a trip to Hawaii again, you would be stopping right in at least one place here before getting to your final destination. So our source location is Yokohama Port. Source location would be Nissan, and then again, would be the first leg would go from Nissan to Yokohama Port, and then from there, Yokohama Port, see our next freight order, would go to the Mombasa Port, and then again, last leg from Mombasa Port, finally to the actual mission. So that's why it's important to see the Stages tab in the freight unit. It'll let you know how many stages and what is the actual transportation plan for this specific freight unit. If you scroll down here at the bottom, if maybe you've realized the items that we have, it's the items that we're going to be transporting, in this case with simply one vehicle. Of course, it's the training environment, so for training purposes, we quite simplified this. So we have one vehicle, and now I can show you how to have this displayed at all times at the bottom if we have some time, but we'll leave that for last. So basically, this is what we're going to be transporting. We're going to have 3 different stages, which are 3 different freight orders. And now we can access one of these freight orders directly from here, or we can go to the window that I have open in the back just by closing this one and accessing that. We also have the map option. Now, sometimes the training environment has acted up on me, but I'm going to go to the map just to see if this time it does not act up on me. And we can actually see. So it's like a visualization of these stages. So we would have a map that displays the locations where we're going to be stopping over. But now again, in the training environment, I know sometimes it wasn't working that well. And of course, today is one of those, unless it's loading and just taking a while. And yeah, it's not working. Okay. So let's see if I can go back or simply just close this window before the entire system crashes. Okay, well, too late. It already crashed. All right. So I'm just going to open that once again just to look at the freight order. I think it's quite simple, but at least I hope you're following and understanding what I'm explaining so far, just so we can follow up now with what's interesting. So the last 5 minutes, we're going to take a look at that freight order that I wanted to show you before the system closed here. I think we were looking at 288. So I'm going to open that DTR once again. And here we go. We have that DTR, our inbound delivery number. So again, now the tab is locations and dates and times because it's the last one I was looking at, document flow. And here I can access my freight orders directly. So I'm going to go and access my first freight order here, which should be my first leg, which should be from Nissan to Yokohama Port. So I'm going to click on that one. Okay, so you see they all look the same initially, but now you see at the top I'm looking at my freight order. And the document flow tab is also there. It's in every one of them, so you always know what they're linked to. It always tells you what documents they're linked to. And we're going to go to the tab that I believe is key here, which is the execution tab. So I'm clicking on the folder and I'm looking at the execution tab here. The output management tab. Okay. And the output management tab should be the one where we would find the SOW document. So this tab, if we look at the top section here, we have the UNOE SOW form. You can simply select it. And then below, where it says communication details, action details, document preview, we click on document preview. And that would display at the bottom a SOW document that can be downloaded and printed. Okay, so let me click on OK. And we'll see what this one looks like. And that will be the last thing we're going to look at in terms of navigation in TM. And we'll go in to see now how we would assign the freight PO to one of these freight orders. Okay, so eventually TM is very, very slow in the training environment today because not even the SOW is loading. Okay, I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds. If not, I could always just click on another one and hopefully that one will go faster. All right, so let me just get this one out of the way and leave it loading on a side. Well, it decides to load. I'll click on another and hopefully this one goes faster. If not, no need. I'll leave it loading on the side, and once it decides to go on, we'll go back to it. Okay, so again, I'm navigating to the output management and taking a look at this SOW form. Okay, again, I'm clicking on document preview. Okay. All right, and 2 out of 2, no result. So basically, if it decides to load, we'll take a good look at it. But here's where we would find our SOW document. So let's say here's where the TM planner would basically generate the SOW. This is the document that would be used eventually to generate the freight procurement PO. And once we have the final results with the actual charges and the actual dates, the SOW would be updated. And now, according to the last conversations we had in New York with Babacar, that's why I think the UN was purchasing PDF editors so that you can edit the document directly in PDF with the actual charges and rates and upload it to TM if necessary, or use that document and just update manually in every tab the actual charges and dates and so on. Okay, so basically this one will not load. I left another window there loading just in case it decides to do so later on. But I think in terms of navigation and where to find things, I think we have enough now. Let's go into what you're interested in looking at mostly. But I think that without this overview, you would have been even more lost. Okay, so we're exiting this screen and we're going back to initially our first page, right? Our home page where we first started the WebEx session. And we were, remember, the ERP Logistics Integration tab. We have our Freight Order Management tab where we can simply click on Display Freight Order if we know the freight order number, or the Overview of Freight Orders if we actually don't know the freight order, but we can search by PO or inbound delivery document for all the freight orders that are linked to a specific to all the freight orders that are linked to a specific inbound delivery document or goods PO. This last planning tab that we didn't take a look at before, this is the one that, especially here with the hyperlink where it says Transportation Cockpit, this is the link that'll take us, if we are the TM Planner, to where we would have to select the freight units and generate the transportation proposals. And now I won't take more than 3 minutes on this one, but Transportation Cockpit, and of course judging by the fact that this is going to work fast enough so we don't waste too much time here. So if I click on Transportation Proposal as a TM Planner, you'd have options to select DAP scenarios, XWork scenarios where you manually have to assign the freight orders, or the ones that are FCA Incoterms. So let's say I'm only selecting this XWork scenario and I'm clicking on Continue, just so you visualize what I've been talking about. And now the TM Planner is going to select the best transportation proposal. This is what the screen looks like. So basically, the screen is showing us to the left all the freight units that still don't have a transportation proposal set. So no legs are generated, no FOs exist. You would simply, as a TM Planner, select one of these freight units and generate a transportation proposal. Again, here's where we'd also combine the freight units if necessary, but I just want to show you quickly what you would be doing as a TM Planner and what the screens would look like. So you see I have selected my freight unit, which is the one here, 392, and you have all the possible proposals that the system is displaying for you. Whether it's by sea or by air, they're all here. So kind of like booking a flight, right? It tells you also the stages that you have. So in this case, you have 3 different stages. What that means is that our first stage would be truck. So from A to B, we would be doing this trip by truck, then basically to a port, we see here C, and the last would be again by truck. So let's go to the right a little more and see what our source location is and where the destination is. So from source to destination, we're doing this by truck to the port, and then from the port, Carlson Port to Nakota Port, we'd be doing that by sea. And then at the bottom, the last one to the mission would be by truck. So if we move down, let me go with this button and scroll to the right here and go back up. This is what I was talking about before in terms of filtering by actual cost. We see here the column for cost, the duration of the trip, or any other way you would want to sort the results. You also want the vehicle to be the one leading your search. You would select on this column and sort by the type of vehicle or transportation you'd rather. All right, so basically that's the screen where the TM Planner would be selecting the most appropriate proposal if, let's say, in this case, it has to be manually done because it's a freight forwarder scenario. So as this is, let's say, a freight forwarder scenario, we have to manually select the proposal. We can click here and say, this is the proposal I like the most, the very first one with 3 stages. And we're going to eventually generate 1, 2, and 3 freight orders if I go on with this. So I can say accept planning. I'm going to take a look at this one because maybe we can just work with this one for the rest of the WebEx, meaning now we're going to eventually assign the freight PO number to these freight orders. So here you go. We have our freight unit here and the 3 freight orders that are about to be generated. Now they're not generated yet until I click on save, but the system is telling you this is what you've chosen. Is this what you want to go forth with? So basically 3 stages. If we click on save, when I go back to this freight unit, I'm going to see that eventually I generated 3 freight order documents that are going to show up in the document flow tab that we were looking at before. Okay, so basically we have that. Let me just make this screen a bit smaller and see that we have eventually, if I say no, for example, if I do undo here, this whole thing would be undone. And now we would just do it once again. Select the line, transportation proposal, And in this case, we're looking at, I believe, the 514. I don't think it's the same one we were looking at before. Let me check the chat quick. So no questions and no new attendees. Okay, let me just cancel this one quickly because I just want to work with a single freight unit, one that's not here duplicated. A lot of these duplications that you see here is because we've been playing around so much with this training environment that every time you edit one of the transportation proposals, it generates several freight units here. So let's say that in this case, I'm looking at these 2 freight units. And here we go. I can imagine that. So you know what? Forget it. I'm not going to waste any more time with that and go directly into the freight order management. So let's say that we're looking for a freight order. So in this case, now I'm going to take your role directly because I see that the training environment is acting up and I may be doing things that eventually will take me to an error page. And now let me just upload the PowerPoint here so you guys can see where I am. Okay, finally. All right. So now that we have all this section here clear, and now let's say that we already have our SOW document, we are creating our shopping cart for freight, and all the process, which is exactly the same, nothing changes here. We finally get our approved PO for freight, and eventually what we have to do now is assign a carrier and PO to a freight order. So eventually we have to assign now the freight PO to one of the freight orders that we have here. So let's go back to TM and see how we would do that exactly. So under the tab Freight Order Management, Overview Freight Orders, click on that link. And this will display a screen again very similar to the one we saw before, now with different fields, different search fields, but again, this looks a lot like SRM. We have all our results here. And before I click on anything, so basically we could either, whatever information we have or we know, we could just add to any of these fields, click on the apply button here at the bottom and get our results if, let's say, we knew the documents that we're searching for in terms of freight order, the document type, of vehicle resource. There's a lot of ways to search for your freight order. Another way, and I think it's probably the easiest, would be to go here to change query. And what that'll do in the system is allow you to now use even more fields. But the most interesting ones for you are probably the last 2 at the bottom, which are the ones related to the goods PO or the ECC inbound delivery number. Okay, we're looking at the UNOE scenario. So all we would have to do is write our inbound ECC inbound delivery number here. And now click on apply. All the results we get are going to be FOs, so freight orders, that are linked to that one inbound delivery document. So we see here 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 different documents with different document types that are all supposed to be linked to one to one inbound delivery document, right? Like I said before, let's move over to the right, because all the way to the right is where we can see, there you go, the goods PO number linked to all these documents. And we see here that this one is actually the same goods PO number linked to all those freight orders. So in a way, we're in good track. What this means is that all those freight orders belong to the same goods PO and the same if we have the same DTRs and we have the same inbound delivery document number. Okay, so basically that's what I wanted you to understand, that now we're going to dig into those documents. It's better that we saw the documents before we navigated through the tabs so we know what we're looking at. You could always, just like in SRM, move the columns manually, as I'm doing here. And again, this training environment today is acting up quite a lot. Hopefully this one doesn't crash. Okay, well, I'm not getting lucky with the environment today. All right, let's go back. So any questions while TM takes control of my presentation? Okay, all right, and we're back. So I'm taking a look at the chat. Nothing new so far, and no new attendees either. Okay. So what I was trying to show you, now that I have control of the training environment again, is how these documents are all linked, right? So at the left, all the way to the left, we have our FOs and the type of document that is linked to it. Now, each one of these will represent one thing, right? So ZF01 represents the type of freight order and the type of Incoterm that is assigned to it, and ZF03 does the same. So if we look at to the right here, the carrier description, we have the Nissan Trading Co. So these three stages, I'm quite sure this belongs to an FCA Incoterm type DTR, because we have vendors and we have freight forwarders that in this case have been assigned. And that's how I can tell directly what type of DTR and what type of Incoterm we have here. So if I wanted to, let's say, assign the freight PO document to these freight orders. Now, I know it can be confusing to go from all those terminologies, freight PO, freight order, but you'll get used to it. We would simply select the two lines, so the two freight orders. Okay, this is great. All right, I'm not being lucky today with this. Yeah, let's see if this time it goes through. We can do it quickly. And again, apologies for how this is acting up today. All right. All right, fine. So I'm doing the same thing as before, just faster speed. I'm selecting the two freight orders that need to be assigned a freight PO. Hold on, I'm seeing something in the chat. Yes, Maxime, you can assume you won't have these many bugs in production. Okay, sometimes the training environment either is undergoing maintenance or has not undergone maintenance, and you can encounter more bugs. It also depends on the time of the day. Usually in the afternoons in Spain, more people are using training environment, more people are performing trainings, and it's slower. There's a lot more glitches, and I've just been lucky enough to deliver a WebEx, I guess, in one of those moments. But no, in production, everything should run much smoother. Okay. Now, I'm selecting the two freight orders here, and I would simply go to the subcontracting button, if you can see here. So I'm next to assign driver, remove manual block, subcontracting, and go to assign carrier and SRM freight PO. Okay, so basically select the freight orders that I want to assign a freight PO to. Now you can do that in group like I just did, selecting all of them at once and assigning the same freight forwarder, or you could, if by any chance it's a different freight forwarder for each leg, which according to what I've heard in New York, it's quite possible, and is probably more of the norm than the one person doing it all. I don't know. It's you guys are the pros on that. But you can also do that individually. So you could select each freight order and assign the freight forwarder individually, or if it's the same for all, you can do it the way I'm doing it just now. You'd click on assign the carrier, and here we would simply add the carrier information by clicking on the match box and searching. If let's say we don't know the carrier information directly, and we could simply add the name here, perform the search, and then once we have our results, and hopefully we do get the results here. If not, I can always just change this here. Okay, so I'm not, definitely not today. Okay. Let's try it with another search. and see if I can get anything here. No. All right, so not the best day to prove that the training environment is working well. I know in production it's a different story, but basically, you know what, instead of adding that, I'm going to just add the business partner number, which luckily I have at hand. And that is not going to give me anything either. Very good. Okay, so basically our search here would show at the bottom the actual carrier freight forwarder that we would simply select, and that freight forwarder carrier would be added here. I'm going to simply write the number on this one instead. And the freight purchase order number we would have to add here. Now again, we were talking before that we don't have the direct linkage between SRM and TM. So in this case, I could just add any number I want to, but of course you would have to add the actual real freight PO number and click on OK, and that would automatically assign the carrier. See, now it's telling me this one doesn't exist, so maybe I can just, there you go, see 74. Oh my God, okay. Let's go again. 1574. I'm going to try with 1574 in this case because I saw something show up with 1574. Okay, there you go. See? So we have now our carrier and we have our freight purchase order number, and we would click on OK, and that would eventually assign, see, SRMPO document updated. So that would assign to both these freight orders that freight PO document that I was adding and also the actual freight forwarder. Now both these freight orders that needed a freight forwarder are assigned the freight PO and the freight forwarder itself, just in a couple of clicks. So basically, and now without all the issues in the training environment, what I did is select them here, go to subcontracting, click on assign carrier and SRM freight PO, and here add the information of the carrier and the information of the freight PO. Clicked on OK, and the system automatically assigned both of them that information. So I think up to this point, and since this is something that the role of the freight order manager would have to do, are there any questions here? If there's, besides the bugs, and I guess forgive me for that, it's beyond my control, and I'm just trying to get through with those glitches. But okay, thanks, Maxime. And I haven't heard anything else from Narda and Ramon. Hopefully they're following too. And if anything, they're having any trouble asking any questions or contacting me, just let me know, Maxime, and I can go over something. But I think this is quite simple. Okay, so now comes the second part of what's interesting to you. So basically what we just did now is this, the last part here, assign carrier and PO to freight order. So what would we do now is actually edit the freight order with routes, dates, and charges. Okay, so that would be part 2 of what we're intending to do here. So basically, now that we have our freight orders here, we just have to click on one. And since we're already familiar with these documents, because we were looking at that initially, right now we see that we're in the Output Management tab. Remember, this is how we navigate through each one of them. Okay, we have our SOW form here, which I'm not going to click on because the page that I set aside from at the beginning has still not loaded. So I'm not going to push my luck with that one. Now, what would be our next place to go? Let's say if we want to edit charges, right? So now we're adding our actual charges, the ones that have been confirmed by the freight forwarder. Well, we go to the tab called Charges. And here we go. We add the tab Charges, and we see here we have $5,000 US, which is the estimated amount that would cost us for this specific freight order, so specific leg, specific stage. So from one point to another point, and in this case, if we want to know exactly what point we're talking about, we can go to Stages and see that right now we're talking about destination source Durban port to Dar es Salaam port. And I don't think I said that too correctly, but this would be our leg and the charges for that specific leg in transportation. All right, so the estimated charges are here, and we'd have the sum. Let's click on the arrow. Hopefully the system won't crash while I explain this. Select the actual charge line, and let's scroll down a bit here so we can move around. And in the actual charge, see, we have the estimated charge at the top and the actual charge at the bottom. If we wanted to add our actual charge, and again, I'm working on, and forgive me, I'm working on one of these freight orders that has already been assigned a carrier, because the system is acting up so much. I don't want to keep playing around searching for things and wasting time. So eventually we're rewriting the information that's already there. In this training, I'm clicking on the edit button, and once we click on the edit button, we should be able to make any changes, right, to this actual charge. And if we can't here, okay, so in this case it looks like we can. So here's where we would add, let's say 6,000. Let's say it's $1,000 US dollars extra than what was estimated, the actual charge. We also have an interesting checkbox here, if I can maximize that a little bit. That'll tell us the actual rate amount. Let me move it over and make it a bit bigger. Maybe we can read what it is. So manually change the rate amount. So we can add the full calculation as we've done here. And if we click on the checkbox here for manually change rate amount and ignore calculation route, what we're telling the system is that this is the full price, okay, the final full price. If instead of doing that we don't check this box, what we're telling the system is that this shouldn't be, there you go. Okay, so that at least is working. Okay, so this can prove what I'm saying. So if I add 6,000 here in the column for the rate, what I'm telling the system is that it's calculating 6,000 per cubic meter. All right, so you see the total calculation is quite large because, of course, it's multiplying that amount per cubic meter and giving me the total result. Now, if I click on this checkbox for ignore calculation rule, what I'm telling the system is that this is the total and final price. Okay, not per cubic meter, but the total and final price, 6,000. Okay, so you see the difference just by checking and unchecking this box, how the price changes. So eventually that would be one of the things to do if we were updating charges and adding the actual charges in the freight order, in each of the freight orders. Okay, we would go to the Charge tab, click on Edit, and in the actual charge line, add the actual charges. Okay, the estimated charges would be on top, and now we see, if we look at the top here, that 6,000 US dollars is the total amount in local currency now, instead of 5,000 as it was before. Yeah, we would simply save, and that would keep the changes. All right, again, so if we go back to our poster and what was important to us, we have just now updated the charges. Okay, we can also change the routes and change the dates. So let's take a look at that and see how we can do that. All right, so I'm checking the chat. Everything's fine, so let's continue. All right, so we have our freight order here. We're still in the Stages tab now. So we went from the Charges tab to the Stages tab. And we can again still change the dates. Okay, to believe. Okay, see the edit button is grayed out, so that means I'm still in edit mode. So I simply have to go to the planned departure date here and change the dates if I wish to change them here manually one by one, or I could do them all together by going to the freight unit. Now the only thing is that we have, since we're doing it by freight orders, we would have to do it individually, because the freight order manager shouldn't have the access to be able to go into the freight unit and edit all the stages. Okay, basically the access should be to the freight orders, where we would have to individually upload and edit the charges. Okay, so basically here's where we change our dates using the calendar or doing it manually. The charges in the charge tab. And what else do we have? The last part, dates and routes again. So if we want to change routes, we would do it here as well. So we can just move over to our left and see source location, destination location, simply access the field and make the change in one of those fields. I think that now it may be acting up here a bit. Probably. Okay, so yes, it's not going to let me do it. So basically, those are the 3-4 steps that we would have to do if we were the a freight order manager. So we're basically assigning the carrier, we're assigning the freight PO number to the freight orders, then we're updating the charges to these freight orders, as we saw here in the charges tab. We were also updating the dates. Let me go over to the business partner tab here, where I believe here is we can, yes, okay. So we were looking at the stages tab, where we could basically make the changes in the dates. And you see here in the business partner tab for the still in the freight order, if you can see here, the consignee, as we were seeing before, the carrier that has been assigned and the executing carrier. To the right, we would also have the information related to that. So remember when I said you could edit the carrier one by one, right? One freight order at a time instead of doing it, assigning it all at once. What we would have to do is simply access our freight order, like we're accessing this one. And in the carrier line, where we see here, we simply, and here I'm able to do it, yes, okay. Here, click on the matchbox and eventually add a new freight forwarder. Click on OK once we've, I'm not going to play around with that since it's been crashing so much. And the carrier here would change to the new carrier. So instead of having Kuhn & Nagel here, it would change for whoever we're changing it for this specific freight order. These changes can be made after we have our freight PO approved and we have the final confirmation of actual charges, and also can be done afterwards. Okay, we were under the impression the first time we delivered the training in New York that once we have changed the status of the freight order, and now remember the status part that we were talking about at the beginning, where we said that it was still not an execution or an execution. Okay, remember we were talking about that at the beginning, the life cycle status of the DTR. We thought we wouldn't be able to actually change the freight forwarder, but you can. Okay, so you can change the freight forwarder even if you have already started to submit events. Now I know the submission of events isn't important for you. We've just covered the 3-4 basic things that we would expect the freight procurement and aviation team to perform. And these are it. So changing the carrier, changing the charges, changing the dates, which I believe is quite simple once you become familiar with the tabs. And let's say that now you want to take a look at the events that would have to be submitted, right? This, in your case, would not be something you would be expected to do as a freight order manager, but this tab execution that we're looking at here, in this tab what you guys can see is all the events that are supposed to be planned events for this specific leg. So this freight order should have all these, let's say, events to submit, right? And these events would also require specific documents to be submitted linked to these events, whether they are expected events, like a handover document or a loading begin, or whether they are unexpected events, as you can see here for delay. Okay, so this freight order, again, we're still in the freight order tab, shows the actual execution of, or the actual submission of events. Some of them have already been submitted, as I was saying before. Sorry for using one of the freight orders that was already tampered with and not fresh and new, but the system has been acting up so much that I just wanted to keep going through with it instead of wasting our time with the system crashing. So basically, some of the events have already been submitted, and even unexpected events have been added here too. Okay, so basically I think I've covered everything that I wanted to make sure I covered before the end of the session. Now it's been an hour so far, so this is the time maybe we can leave for some questions. So if any of you have questions or would like me to repeat something, now is the time to do so. I'm just going to try one more time to try to generate the SOW form. And well, there it is. Okay, last one. It was clear. Okay, so listen, last chance. So we didn't get a chance to see the SOW. So I'm again in the Output Management tab for the freight order. And we see now that the SOW has generated, the document preview has generated here. And we see that we have the purchase order number here. We have the inbound delivery and the freight orders that are linked to this SOW. See, so the statement of work is what it looks like in the system, and it contains all the information that is key to us and related to the specific freight order. Okay, so this is what we would be downloading and using to request or to process the freight PO and create the shopping cart for freight, and eventually could be edited with the software and uploaded once again with the actual charges, actual dates, and also actual legs and stopovers. Okay, so if there are no questions, no from Ramona, no from Narda, no real questions on my side. Okay. All right. Well, even if they're not real questions, it's okay. I know I'm not sure how familiar you are with TM. I'm not sure if you even had a chance to spend time going through the system, if anyone has guided you through it, if you've seen the videos that we've recorded in the past. Apologies for the system acting up sometimes there when we were trying to find some of the freight orders, but I think overall it was, I covered what I wanted to cover and basically what you were supposed to do if you are a freight order manager. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'll close the session. I'll give you guys another minute or two if you want to add something or you want me to repeat something. If not, I'll close the session, stop the recording, and then send you back the presentation and the links. Thank you guys for participating. It would have been good to hear your voices and have a chat at some of the points, but since there are no mics, at least we got you through the chat. So thank you guys for joining.